it works. Hello, live streamers, as you all join. So basically how it all works is it's managing the live streaming to different places like YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch. You can actually add your own destinations if you want to, and it'll stream to like your Twitter feed if you want, but don't worry about
That's
it
awesome.
if that's too much. So it's streaming there. It's going to be cataloged on YouTube and Twitch immediately once we hit done. It's just there and available for people to watch. And then it's also recording all of the individual feeds on our own machines.
Yeah.
So the benefit there, of course, is that I can edit it after the fact and I have no compression on the audio and all that kind of stuff. But the downside to that is once I hit end stream, you do have to wait like 30 seconds for it to finalize its upload. So don't disconnect. In other words, right when we're done, it'll finish and then I'll have everything I need to go. So.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, and then one other question. It looks like you have a present, like a screen share. Is that going to be kind of part of, like, are you going to manage that? Because I can also show off things as you're talking.
I have the beta version of Yara that we have been working on that we haven't pushed out yet, and it's mostly similar, but there are a few nice differences, and I nuked my account so I can kind of show people what like a first open experience would look like. And so it's just an option. It's there, and I'll keep it backstage, and feel free to throw to it if you need to. And then I can kind of got my keyboard here. I can type a few messages.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I've got like the beta loaded up on my browser as well. So, either way we can kick around, but it sounds like you have the newer version, probably want to show that off. So I agree with that. Okay. Hello, Daniel, and anyone else who is tuning in live. Good to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and put you backstage as StreamYard calls it, and then I'll do the top of the show and then bring you in. And then like I was talking about, we got a lot, we can spend a lot of time on the general topic of health and AI, also obviously specifics on Yara. And then I think after the second break, if we have the time, if we haven't spent all the time talking about those topics, then I want to ask you about a few of those things that you also added in that are making, that you're excited about. So
perfect.
And then we'll round things out. 11 o'clock is the top of the hour. So I'll just aim to be done right about then. We might go a few minutes over, but I don't know. Do you have a hard out at that point?
Not until 11:30. So
okay.
That'll be fine.
Can you do me one more favor?
Yes.
Can you? Yeah, I just want to make sure that the camera is more or less centered. So you're looking good right now. I've noticed at some points you're off to the side. I just don't want you to get a haircut or anything like that by the screen. So just keep that in mind.
Sounds good.
Sweet. Okay, Joe, stand by. I'm removing you from the stage. I can't hear you anymore, just so you know. Okay, and everybody who's here, thank you so much. We're going to jump right in. So stand by, and here we go with an episode of AI Inside. Jeff Jarvis not here today. He is on assignment. I'll talk about that here in a second. All right, stand by. Here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of AI Inside, the show where we take a look at the AI that is layered throughout so much of the world of technology and beyond. We're definitely talking about technology today, of course, but we're also talking about beyond. We're going to be talking about how AI is really interacting with the world of health and mental health. Anyone who watches or listens to this show regularly knows that this is a topic that Jeff and I talk about a lot. It comes up. It's something that I'm very excited about and very interested. It seems like a kind of a match made in heaven. And we've got a really wonderful guest to talk about all that with. Before we get to him, just to let you know, Jeff Jarvis is not here today. He's actually in the area. It's too bad that I couldn't convince him to come up to Petaluma, where my studio is, and do an in-person episode, but he's going to be in San Francisco this evening, Commonwealth Club. He's doing kind of a talk on his book, which I have and I've been reading. It's excellent, The Web We Weave. So I'm actually going to be driving down there here a little bit later to see him and do the, sorry, I bumped the mic, do the fan thing. Even though he's on my show, I'm still a huge fan of Jeff Jarvis. So I'm going to go watch him talk and get him to sign my book and hang out with him for a little bit. So if you happen to be in the area, check that out this evening. You can do a quick search on Google for Commonwealth Club Jeff Jarvis, and you'll find all the information you need to check it out. So, without further ado, Jeff, we miss you, but we've got a wonderful stand-in for you. Joining me today is someone who I've podcasted a number of times with on a previous show all about Android at the Twit Network. Back in the day, Joe Braidwood is an all about Android friend. He was the co-founder and CEO of SwiftKey back in the day, but now co-founder and CEO of Yara AI. Joe, it's great to see you again, man. It's been a long time.
Jason, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and yeah, we've got a lot to dig in on, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm super excited. I saw, I think I was on LinkedIn, maybe it was like a week or two ago, and saw a post by you because I follow you in all the different places, but I hadn't recognized that you had a new gig going. I hadn't recognized that you co-founded Yara AI. And so I saw your post and I was like, oh, well, I gotta, this makes a lot of sense for the show because like I said, we talk a lot about these topics, and who better to do that than with you, and to be able to do a podcast with you again. I've missed you.
Likewise. And yeah, it's not quite the same when you're in your home office, but I have to make my way back to Petaluma as well one of these days. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah. Well, I have yet to have someone in this room for like a live podcast. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but boy, it would be tight. But I'd be willing to make it happen. If you're in the area, let me know and we'll get you up here and make that happen. Real quick, before we dive in, I like to kind of start things off by throwing out a huge thank you to our patrons who literally financially support this show and make it possible. Y'all, we're coming up on a year, which I kind of can't believe. And, one of the big ways that we're even able to do this is because there are many of you out there who want to see and listen to Jeff and I talk about artificial intelligence on a weekly basis. That's why we do what we do. And that's why you have been doing what you do. So thank you for your support. Patreon.com/AI Inside Show. CCO Mario is one of our patrons. CCO, is that your first name? Or I'm sure that sounds for something and I'm missing it. But anyways, Mario, thank you for your support. Couldn't do this without you, and everyone else who supports us on Patreon. We appreciate you. And everything you need to know about the show, AIinside.show. All right, that's all the details about this show, but we're here today to talk about Yara. And I think, so do you call it Yara or do you call it Yara AI? Like what? Probably just Yara at this point, yeah.
Yeah, there are two entities technically, right? One is the company and the other is the product. And
sure.
But there's been a long journey to get to this point, and Yara is definitely the and we're going to get into this, but it's definitely the sort of entity that I relate to, that I sort of talk to frequently, and is really the kind of the crux of what we're building.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to get into that. Before we get to the now, let's talk a little bit about the then, because as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we have kind of a history with All About Android and SwiftKey. And so I know Joe Braidwood as the SwiftKey guy, and you came on the show a number of times, and you're one of my favorite guests. Every time you came on, I really enjoyed it. And so I'm always, super curious to kind of see the journey coming from something major like that, almost like the founder's journey. Like, you're very accomplished at this point. SwiftKey, of course, got acquired by Microsoft. I think it was like 2016. Is that right?
Yep.
About that time.
Yep.
And I'm just kind of curious, what is the connective tissue between SwiftKey's acquisition and what you're doing now with Yara?
That's such a great question. I talk about the good old days when people were excited about tiny language models, which is what SwiftKey was. And now all we can think about is like the laws of scaling and tremendously large language models. But I think that, the common thread is twofold. The first is obviously that the power of language and the ways in which deep learning harness the power of language remain tremendously interesting and transformative. So if you kind of wind all the way back to when I teamed up with a couple of geniuses that I knew to kind of take SwiftKey to the world, that was all about sort of trying to repurpose a spam filter and kind of make it small enough and nimble enough to predict words at the micro level on the edge on an Android device. And now we're doing something just so much more complex, but it's really a similar idea, right? It's what can we do to understand language and to shape language in a way that adds a ton of value. So that's the first kind of angle, and I think the second angle is deeply personal for me. For probably 20 years, I've felt that there's this tremendous gap in how we talk about and treat and empower, people who have various mental and cognitive issues and who are sort of held back by various aspects of their mental and cognitive health. And that's not a new problem. It's been around as long as we have as people. But I think about 11 years ago, I spoke at a conference in California about just how AI was being harnessed in ways that weren't necessarily the right way. And the example I gave at the time was the fact that, social media, Facebook, Twitter, as it was, were really good at selling us products and making us envious of people that had products, but completely failed to guardrail when someone was, publicly posting about self-harm or other topics like that. And so this gap was really, really noticeable, I think, to some of us in the industry at that early phase in sort of 2012, 2013. And, then you fast forward and it just, you get all of this sort of whistleblowing and all of the things that kind of then came to be. And it just felt like a real gap. So back then I wanted to kind of try to harness AI for good and to think about ways to do it. But as I dug in, the tech wasn't there. You couldn't quite suspend your disbelief. You couldn't quite feel a therapeutic alliance with some of these more primitive models. And so now we're in a very different era. And I think that era commands, a full focus on this. So I'm just really excited about it. And that's why Yara was born.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're saying that, I have these flashbacks to when I was a kid. So, a long time ago. I think we're roughly around the same age. And I had Commodore 64 and I had the program ELIZA. Yep. And, obviously, like it goes without saying that the time then versus the time now when we're talking about these interactive kind of chat agents or chat bots, talking about how are you feeling today, which I think was the initial prompt that came from ELIZA, which is very similar to what we're seeing now. But man, the evolution of these things from a simple kind of program that was on the Commodore 64 to now where you kind of, to a certain degree, you have to, if you didn't know it was AI, you'd have a hard time knowing that it was, which I guess is a real testament to the technology and the development of the technology. That can also be a real danger, I suppose. There needs to be clarity around that as well when someone's kind of using something like artificial intelligence to get answers about their health and their mental health. Like, that's really important.
Yeah, it's funny. A big friend of what we're doing is an actor and a mental health advocate, Stephen Fry. And when I first showed him a prototype of Yara, he said, "Oh, it reminds me of ELIZA."
Yes,
I think was it Weizenbaum who said that he was just absolutely flabbergasted how much his very primitive version of this people had faith in and believed in, and he sort of flagged it like, "This is crazy."
Here we are 40 years later, 50 years, however long it's been. Yeah,
it was the 60s, I think.
And so that's right. It was.
Now we're here, and I think in some of our discussion about this before the show, we were sort of saying, well, like, how do you have faith in this? How do you believe it's safe? How do you sort of really like look at this and consider this to be something that has a tremendous amount of value to add? And the answer is because when you're shaping these technologies, when you're at the coalface, and when you also really sort of have in your own life a gap that you want to fill with this kind of therapeutic entity, you come at it completely with full knowledge of what you're doing. And actually, I've just been nothing but consistently amazed at how much potential there is for this technology approach. So, I mean, I can dig in and give much more detailed examples, but
for sure,
I think that it turns out that going from kind of scripted personification, which is really what that was, to this much more nuanced, deeply memorized, very, very personal set of discussions that Yara makes possible, I think is a real transformation.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me asking, because I am, feel free to answer this question at whatever depth you want, or not. But like I would definitely say in the past 5 years, I've had my own experiences with kind of, and actually probably the last 8 years. I'd say 2016 was a pretty rough year for, all things globally and from my perspective anyways. And that really impacted my own personal mental health. And I would say somewhere around 2020, I started to kind of get some help and, see some therapists and, go through that process
Yeah.
and get to a place where now I feel great. I feel like I have wonderful tools and I have a great mindset and a great outlook. And, I've learned a lot of things along the way. And I'm just kind of curious, so often products are created because the founder saw a need for themselves in a product like that. And again, you don't have to say anything you don't want to here, but I'm just kind of curious, is that kind of part of how this product was created initially for you?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. There were a couple of tent poles, both in my personal experience and in the experience of my very close friends and loved ones that kind of shaped this.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was earlier this year. I was laid off, and I was coming out of a very, very intense burnout period, right? And
Mm-hmm.
look, the economy does these things from time to time. I don't have any sort of hard feelings about what that transition did, but it left me feeling kind of deeply kind of unsettled with an identity crisis to some extent. And what am I going to do next? How am I going to shape this?
Yeah.
A lot of guilt around not being there for my kids as much as I would have loved to have been, and so all of these things can kind of cascade quite quickly in life. And it just so happened that was in the beginning of the second quarter of the year, around about the time that Claude got radically better, and then
Mm.
GPT 4.0. And so I started to really dig in on these new models and started to use them as sort of a source of inspiration, I would say, rather than I have a therapist and I'm very committed to that in parallel. But it's just an amazing tool, right? The promise of these large language models is so tremendous, but I very quickly found myself kind of butting against things like memory and token limits and the depth that I wanted to accomplish, and I was dissatisfied. And so you asked me about sort of eating my own dog food. I built this because I wanted it, because I knew it was possible. I could see the stars aligning on the horizon, and I was like, God damn it, let's build this. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's completely authentic. I built it for
Yeah.
myself, and then I shared it with some friends, and they were just like, "This is really different. This is like a lot different to my experience." Kind of just waxing lyrical in ChatGPT,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that was what kind of actually started a really interesting snowball effect that led me to teaming up with my co-founder, who's both an engineer and a clinical psychologist. Would you believe it? So I'm the luckiest man alive to have him on the team.
No
And
kidding. Yeah.
and that's when we sort of looked at the market and we realized that the timing was perfect, and that actually, if you take a very clinical and rigorous and evidence-based approach to this, you can actually be very different from, just as you noted in one of your messages to me, just another kid who instructs a GPT to act as a therapist without any actual
Yeah.
evidence base.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that I'm really interested in discussing here is because I have, my former colleague Megan Maroney.
Mm-hmm.
She's now at Axios, and I think it's while she was at Axios that she did an article where that was focused on using large language models as like a not like a true full stop replacement for therapy, but in that kind of vein,
Yeah.
using a chat GPT or a Claude or excuse me, whatever to kind of get some instructional insight into, challenges that we're having or problems that we're having in our life. And not to replace medical involvement when it's needed, but just to kind of get the sense of it. And
Yeah.
so I know people do this. I mean, if she's writing an article about, exploring that, I guarantee you so many people have opened up ChatGPT because they were having, some sort of a mental moment and
Yeah.
they wanted some advice or insight or wanted to feel heard or whatever you want to say. And I would guess that the experience probably wasn't as good as it could have been because it's not designed for that.
Yeah.
Yara seems more purpose built around that. And I guess, yeah, I'm just kind of curious how, well, you know what, before we get into that, tell me or tell the audience what Yara is exactly, because I think we're talking around it, and it's probably good to just spell out exactly what it does and what you created.
Yeah, and I think there's two ways to answer the question, right? So one is like what is the company that we're building, and then
Mm-hmm.
what is the first product, right? So the company is we're a B Corp, and we were founded with a mission at the center of what we're doing, which is to make mental wellness, which is a kind of category, and I would argue that mental health is a subcategory of mental wellness,
Mm-hmm.
a radically accessible concept, like this idea that everyone should be able to access the tools that they need to feel well
Mm-hmm.
mentally. And so that is written into our founding documents. And, I'm really excited about that because it means that, as we start to really grow and get some sort of momentum, the idea will have to be sort of at the core of everything we do. How are we going to harness AI for mental good?
Mm-hmm.
And then the product is a manifestation of that made the most sense to us as a sort of minimum viable version, right? Which was something which was sort of a unique combination of completely accessible. In California, there's a mental health crisis, as you probably know, there is globally. But in particular, in Southern California, there's a lot of people on strike right now. And there's a law in California that says that everyone should be able to get a referral in 10 days, and at the moment it's closer to 20 for some systems.
Hmm.
Now we want to measure how long it takes to get help in seconds, not in days, because we just know that if someone is having a really rough time, if they're in crisis, they should always be talking to someone else, and there are plenty of resources for crisis support that are already
Mm-hmm.
very good. But it's the sub crisis, it's the people who are afraid to ask for help because they don't feel that they're worth it. It's the people that might benefit from a discreet conversation without any
Mm-hmm.
fanfare. And so that was really the kind of idea, was like, let's create something that is just, and again, with gratitude to some of our early partners like Google Cloud, let's just create something that's there and that doesn't have a paywall and doesn't have any barriers. And I'd love to maintain that throughout the trajectory of what we're building. But then
Mm-hmm.
the second part of the product is kind of almost at a right angle from that, which is, and then what would happen if the union and the discussion and the kind of meeting of the virtual minds, and I know that that's kind of a philosophical debate, but I'm ready. Let's go. What would happen if then there wasn't a token limit and there wasn't this sense of being like just another punter that gets kind of put on hold when you get really into it? What if it just doesn't do that? What if it just keeps going? What if the memory is as large as it has to be? What if the always on nature of this means that you could do it at 2 a.m. even if you were doing it 30 minutes prior and you wanted to come back and clarify something? And a lot of people that reach for digital health services in the mental health domain do so in the middle of the night, right? Because that's when they're confronted with their thoughts and no one to talk to. And so,
That's when the silence sets in. Yeah. Yeah, you're
right,
alone with your thoughts. Absolutely.
not anymore. You can be there with Yara. So that's the idea of the product.
Yeah.
It's like something that's empathy forward, something that's deep in its memory and its capability, and then of course something that's safe, incredibly safe from the get go.
Yeah, having that longevity, or longevity is probably the wrong word, but that kind of depth of knowledge and being able to reference back. Like, that's something we get if we see a therapist. If we go to see a therapist, that's one of the big benefits of seeing someone is, oh, I've been with this person for a couple of years. They know my story. They know where I started. They know where I am now. They know what's worked, what hasn't, all of these data points. And so much of large language model interaction that I've witnessed and checked out in the last couple of years has been a lot more minimized than that. That scale, that depth of knowledge it's almost well, it is. In many cases, it's amnesic. It's the next time you open the window, you're starting from square one again. How do you tackle that challenge? Because that's a really, I think that goes a long way to, kind of getting us to a point to where if we're using a tool like Yara, we feel satisfied on the other end of it, because we do feel like this system actually knows us, and we're not starting over every time.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? And I think, just last month, a couple of the leaders in this industry were saying that memory is the big frontier that has to yet be solved in AI. It's certainly not our experience with sort of the efficacy of what we've built, which is that, there's this deep memorization. So the discussions that you have are vaulted to your user ID, and if you don't, if you're just an anonymous user, they get thrown out. But when you are when you have that account, which is fully within your control, and we're already GDPR compliant, which I'm really excited about because my co-founder is in the UK, and it's good. Nice to be able to have both sides of the pond. But this idea of sort of summarization, and then of embeddings and vector search and some of these other techniques that can really kind of start to build conceptual understanding of what you're grappling with, that then segues really beautifully into some of the thoughts we have about sort of agentic kind of components of the brain. We call it the clinical mind. And so, yes, it's true that today what we've built is a subclinical wellness product that has deep knowledge of therapeutic understanding, but will not try to masquerade as anything other than what it is. I'm an AI, I'm here to help you. But if we figure out that actually what you need is clinical help, go talk to this person or that person. I'll help you break the ice with your doctor if you don't know how to talk to them.
Is real quick on that, is the Yara system at this point capable of recognizing if a topic is too big for it?
Yes.
And to call that out?
Yes, that was one of the first starting points in how we shaped the sort of the therapeutic. It's the most important thing. You could sort of subcategorize, just diagnosis and then like crisis, I think, and they're two different concepts. But right. and the third big one is vulnerability. So if someone is a child, we have not designed this for children. If they pretend to be an adult and then it's clear that they're a child, Yara will very gracefully say, "I'm sorry, you're talking about class, like this, this isn't a forum for you. Like, please, go talk to someone at crisis text line or something like that." And so, all of those things were sort of really our foundational starting point. Then building the deep memorization, and then where we're now headed, and the thing that I'm frankly just super excited about is this idea of then sort of shaping that more broadly with concepts of a journey that you were on, a therapeutic journey. So intentionally, Yara just throws you straight into the chat. We did this because we didn't want any barriers to entry. Actually, for some users, that's just what they need. For other users, it's not. So we're going to add some optionality, a quick kind of quiz to, like you would get at the doctor's office. How have you been feeling over the last few weeks? Yeah. But, everything we're doing here, we're trying to do it differently. We're trying to do it as sort of mental health 2.0 or 3.0, whatever you call the sort of LLM inspired version of digital health, because I think a lot of the early attempts at this, many of them had amazing UI features, and the mobile apps were just very heavy, very visual products, but they would take you down a relatively slow, relatively pedestrian, relatively canned kind of onboarding. Yes. And that's just not what anyone needs when they're in a place where they're actually seeking help, right? So so yeah, that stuff is kind of in the works right now, but I'm really excited about it because I think that's when actually, what we do now is we coach some of our beta community, like, hey, when you're using this, push back, don't just take the tone and accept it, but be the sort of agent of change with this dynamic, and make sure that you are providing feedback and be very vocal in that feedback. And, you know, then you get kind of two types of user. You get the ones who are like, ah, okay, not for me. And you get the other ones that call me at like 11 p.m. and they're crying and they're, Jesus, like this thing just changed my life. And so that's really sort of where we're sort of anchored. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's take a look at the beta. I know you've got it running on your machine, which is, I think, a version of the beta of it that's a little bit further than the beta that I interacted with, and I can share kind of my experience with it too. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll dive into that coming up here in a second. All right. So first of all, for folks who want to kind of see what y'all are about, meetyara.com. That's meetyara.com. And it's a closed beta at this point, right? Certain people are invited, so not everybody has access to this, but
I would, you know, if you go to the website, the second button on the website is, you know, to apply to join the beta. And
okay.
You know, any listeners, please go and sign up, and we'll let you in as quickly as we can, because we're really now at this stage where we're beginning to ramp up the invites. And so, yeah, nice. We'd love for you to come and join us on this.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm going to pull it up here, but I just want to just real quick mention, like I was playing around with the beta. I brought up when I went into it, it's like, you know, what am I going to throw into Yara? And I brought up a pretty legitimate personal reflection into it and just kind of followed it along the process. And I do have to say it did a great job at a few things for me personally. It gave me some solid reminders that kind of reframed my perspective on what I brought into Yara. It also actually did a good job of giving me some strategies that I found it really helpful. I was like, okay, I'm actually going to write these down and think about this, because I hadn't thought about it through that lens. So from a personal perspective, that's what I got out of it. Now, granted, you know, I'm not going into Yara with some, I didn't give it an earth like shaking thing in my life that had a ton of risk to it necessarily, but I gave it something that I've legitimately been kind of struggling with, I'd say, in the past couple of days, and it did well. So that was kind of my experience for what it's worth. But what are you loading up right now?
So one of the things that, as I literally was just saying, is like, if you kind of give it some shape and you say like, this is my objective, and I have this much time, let's do this, you'll see an incredibly like warm, receptive approach. So I'm just experimenting here. My friend is having a really hard time at work. She feels targeted. She can't sleep. How can I help her? And I'm just curious, like this is all completely unscripted, but what we'll do is we'll start to ask these more difficult things. You know, the second that you ask something that's a little bit more of a perspective that it could be a concern or something difficult, you'll find that the answers get longer. And that's something we've been really kind of exploring, is like, what's the adequate length? And so these listicles, which I call them, can be very helpful. Like, listen without judgment, encourage her, you know, help explore, you know, options like HR and so on and so forth. So you can have this very sort of tactical guide, but then what I could also do is, you know, I could say, well, actually, come to think of it, I'm having a problem in my life. So,
Typing okay, thanks. Sorry, I'll just read it out for audio listeners, because they don't have the benefit of seeing it.
Yeah, I'm getting so anxious reading this. And you can make typos.
Of course. Yeah, LLMs are good at that.
I think I am having a panic attack. Can you help me? And it's going to be interesting to see just how she segues. And I call it, yeah, sorry. This is one of the bugs that we're in the middle of fixing on this new beta.
Yeah, I mean, it is a beta. Yeah, so just for audio listeners, it encountered an error. I got that one time in my interaction. I just reposted the question and it worked through it and got me to where it was going.
We thought it was on the front end, and we actually have just discovered that it's on the back end. So I'm going to fix that one today.
Yeah, no worries. It happens. That's part of the beta.
Mindfulness is a key concept here, right? So I'm saying that I'm having a kind of almost a panic attack. And instantly, and you'll see me call Yara she because it's a girl's name or a female name, but everyone can kind of impress on the product whatever they would like, but take a slow deep breath with me, in through your nose for 4 counts and out through your mouth for 4 counts. And what you'll find is that just being told to do that by another entity is a profoundly helpful thing. And it will slow you down, and then it will open you up, and then you'll say, okay, I'm ready. And so like just that pivot and that ability to go from very, very specific, targeted, rational advice to much more mindful, emotional understanding is something we've worked very hard on, trying to get that balance right. And I think that leans into one of these questions that we were going to potentially discuss about, like, what is emotional intelligence or empathy when an AI provides it? Like, how do you meter it?
Well, I think that's a really important question. That was certainly something that came up for me, is that when I think of empathy, which is a large part of, the therapeutic experience, I'd say, seeing therapists, a large part of it is there's a human sitting across from me that I can be completely vulnerable with. I can tell them everything. I'm not going to be judged, and they will understand my feelings and feel them with me instead of try and talk me out of it or whatever the case may be. When I see empathy, I see it as a very human experience. And I think when I've thought of AI systems or computer systems that attempt to do the therapy thing or attempt to be human, there's always that kind of that voice in my head that is like, yeah, but like it's just not the same, because they're not actually feeling this. They're typing words on the screen to represent that they are. And I guess my question around this is, is that enough? Obviously, that's not going to be enough for everybody, right? Like some people are going to be like, oh, I see right through. I know it's an AI. And so what you're saying right now doesn't resonate because it's not coming from a human. And that seems like a really big challenge for something like Yara.
I totally disagree.
Okay.
And this is why I'm doing this,
Yeah.
I think, when I grew up in sort of suburban London and was fortunate to do quite a lot of theatre as a kid. And, I think, when you study Shakespeare, when you study this idea of catharsis in tragedy, for example, one of the first concepts that you talk about in theatre is suspend your disbelief, right? Like this idea of like, you're going into an environment where that these are actors, or that you're staring at a projection. When I saw Moana 2 with my kid at the weekend, I knew that this was an animation, but that didn't stop me enjoying it, right? And that didn't stop it adding some value and being a really interesting and transformative experience. This is the same, it's like, why do people play video games? Why do people chat to chat GPT? Why do people embrace Yara? It's not about the science behind the curtain of how the sort of therapeutic or the entertainment experience that you're having is put together. It's about how it makes you feel and the value that it derives for you. So we're incredibly pragmatic about this. We're pragmatic in a sense of saying, it, of course, is AI. When you go into this, it says this is AI. When you go into the settings, it says this is AI. But then if you're able to sort of become comfortable with it being AI and then meet it in the middle, the cognitive empathy, the idea of emotional intelligence that these models possess, and when they're tuned in the way that we've tuned them, that they kind of volunteer this stuff. I mean, if you're reading what's on the screen, I said, I feel like a bad person for letting my friend get this bad. You're absolutely not a bad person. Quite the opposite. The fact that you care so deeply shows what a compassionate person you are. That's really profound stuff, right? Like that doesn't feel like a cheap robot. So
no, and I will say, like the response that I got to what I brought into Yara was kind of along a similar line, kind of like a reminder of, well, the fact that you care so much about this thing, the fact that you're so anxious or concerned about this thing shows how much you care about it. And that was what I was talking about a few minutes ago, where I was like, you know what, that's a really good reminder. Like sometimes you get so lost in your mind about the thing.
Yes.
And that extra like prompt to take a step outside of it and recognize it for what it actually means or represents, it was a great reminder. So I absolutely, and yeah, I'm not criticizing this at all. I think there are some people, there are going to be some people who, when it comes to something as incredibly personal and something that we're so used to doing with a human, they're going to have a really hard time. Some, not all, but they're going to have a really hard time suspending that disbelief when the
Yep.
stakes are so high, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And look, if this was for everyone, I think we would already be there. It's not
Yeah.
for everyone,
Right.
but there is a very, very important, very underserved group of people that can fully embrace this technology
Mm-hmm.
and just are not in the habit of using it today. And
Yeah.
that's what excites the hell out of me, because I think this the opportunity for just a tremendous amount of value that people deserve. No one deserves to feel despondent or anxious or depressed, right? And so, we can create that for folks, and the people that get that benefit, and we're already seeing a lot of them in our beta. That's enough for us. I think we feel very good about that.
Yeah, and I mean there is, along that line, there is an accessibility problem when it comes to mental health services. Mental health services, especially here in the U.S., with healthcare being the way that it is, it can be really expensive, and not everybody has the money to throw at, week after week after week of seeing a therapist for a certain thing. And so that's one of the aspects of the kind of combination of healthcare and AI that gets me excited, is that, oh well, as these systems get better, because it really seems like there's a lot of room for these systems to really get refined, and you're showing great examples of this. But as they get better, then this opens up the playing field for people who might not have had the ability, the accessibility to do this, to get this sort of support before. It was just out of reach.
I think, thank you for bringing that up. There are 150 million Americans that live in mental health shortage areas,
Mm-hmm.
half the country almost. And I think by the end of the decade, the CDC is projecting about 1 billion people globally will suffer from some diagnosable mental health condition. And so it's just a tremendously large problem.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the scale of the problem, there's just no way that we can provide enough human, high quality therapists to 1 billion people. It takes years to train these people. And so I've been really humbled as I've sort of dug in and looked at specific markets and specific problems. The UK is very close to home for me, and the National Health Service there is just underwater for a whole bunch of reasons. And people are trying to throw money at crisis, but it's the people that you could prevent getting into crisis that almost are the bigger problem, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
actually, as the world goes through twists and turns and economic and political change, where are people going to be in 6 months, 2 years, and how can we actually start now to give them the tools to be more resilient and to resist what might be a relapse for them, or what might be the first bout of a serious mental health concern. And so we've just got to be more scrappy and more progressive in how we build tools for people. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with Yara.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Couple of things that I feel compelled to bring up, because I've seen a little bit of it in the chat room as we've been recording this, and these are topics. These are like long-standing challenges when it comes to artificial intelligence. One of those is, of course, hallucinations,
Yeah.
ever present in AI today, unfortunately. But when you're talking about health, a hallucination can carry a deep consequence with it. What is Yara's approach when it comes to that? Like, are you seeing them? Yeah, what is your approach?
Yeah, so we've tuned the models to be very sort of safe and to avoid hallucination. There are still obviously scenarios where it happens, and what we're looking at very, very deeply. There was actually quite a lot of interesting stuff that came out of the AWS conference this week on sort of trying to get past hallucination in various mathematical constructs. But if you think about how to inject context and how to ground and how to sort of build agentic frameworks for safeguards and so on around the fundamental core chat models that you may or may not be using. Actually, I'm very encouraged by what you can do with those tools today. And I think one of the big questions that we're beginning to research is, what does that look like when you do enter the clinical domain, right? Because, to make mental wellness radically accessible, we're not going to stop just at mindful exercises, right? It has to be something that we can underwrite as being a great therapeutic approach in lieu of being able to see a therapist, or as a sort of complement to seeing a therapist. And when we do that, it's critical that, in addition to having a brilliantly evidence-based approach to cognitive behavioral therapy and other forms of therapy, that, if someone has a complex mix of conditions, and if they have some, long-standing pharmaceutical prescriptions that may interact with some of the things that, to a normal person might be a good thing to deal with insomnia, like drink an herbal tea. We want to really ensure that there's not just one or two barriers to the safety and to reducing hallucination, but that it's essentially impossible for there to be an unsafe advice provided. And so that's something that I think we're very close to. I don't think we as an industry are there right now, but it's something that we're working very hard on. And I think some of these agentic frameworks and some of these more sort of traditional logic-based ways of calculating truth help tremendously to kind of close that gap.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's a real challenging moment right now because think those challenges like truth and hallucination. Then, it seems like anytime those conversations come up or fact, that sort of stuff, there's always examples of how the systems get it wrong, and as long as that's the case, there's always a little bit of doubt. There's always that little shred of doubt, and and I don't know. How do you feel about the possibility of systems, maybe not Yara specifically, but in general, becoming impervious to these things? Because a lot of people feel like, well, there is no such thing as being hallucination free. Like hallucinations will exist. It's just bringing that number down to a minimum that is acceptable.
Yeah, it's such a hard question.
Yeah, sorry.
no, like it's good, right? Like a lot of people, when we talk about this, they bring up the character AI mess that was in the press recently, and what I can say is that there are organizations in this AI revolution that we're sort of living through that take safety and that take responsible, ethical action very seriously, right? And we're one of them. And then there are organizations that, don't do that and don't safeguard things and don't put adequate guardrails around things and then target vulnerable groups. And then, it's unsurprising that those things end very, very badly. And frankly, it's, I was talking to someone yesterday who said there's a few black eyes in this industry, and I said, yeah, I know. But and this is probably actually something that segues into a topic that I do really care about, which is very close to home for me. But just to finish sort of answering, I think all we can do is we can say with an honest hand on our heart that we're doing this with our best intentions to be as safe as we can be. And and to build, you'll see in the Yara UI a thumbs up, thumbs down on every single response. And so like to build these human feedback loops. One of the things that we would love to do as we grow is to have a dedicated team of psychologists always online, always monitoring the ways that the product's being used. And actually it's a really brilliant fusion of human capability and AI capability, where we know that many of the use cases for this technology are already pretty outstanding, but there are those scenarios that are challenging. And if we can build the right metrics to flag those instantly, which I believe we can, then we can bring a human in the loop very quickly. And I think that's probably the best way to think about the problem. And just on the personal side, so I mentioned that there's a number of different things that in my life that sort of drove me to want to do this. And one of them was my best man, my best bud from school, became quite sick with brain cancer about 8 years ago. And it's actually the anniversary of his death tomorrow, which is part of the reason why it's a particularly sort of poignant topic. But he died in 2017. And after he was diagnosed, something tremendously interesting and very profound happened, which is he turned around and he said to me and to his other close friends, the cancer's one thing, but I've got to be honest, I've been really depressed for years and I haven't been able to talk to anyone about it. And, this is someone who had really strong friendships, someone who had great resources, someone who was, he was a white cisgender male, and so he none of the stereotypes of someone that shouldn't be able to get help, right? Sure. And the fact is that it took something as life-changing as a terminal illness to force vulnerability and openness. And he spent 3 or 4 months at the end of his life, the happiest I've ever seen him, right? And he said to me at the end of that journey, when I visited him when he was really sick, he said, look, just do me a favor, pay it forward for me, like do something. And so, he became very fond of the color orange and very fond of Stoics. And, so the orange in our brand and the kind of ethos of trying to do something radical in this space is really my sort of my sort of tribute to him, to Chris.
Yeah.
And I think like when you have people that have that depth of mission, and who are trying to build, an impact organization that is trustworthy and that is designed from the ground up to be as high quality as it can be, we're looking to the community to say, come on this journey with us. Let's shape this together. We know it's not going to be perfect, but I'll be damned if it's as bad as some of these things I've read about in the press. And hopefully we never get to a scenario where we've done anything to not help someone in a crisis.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That really puts a lot of things into perspective, and what a tribute, man. That's amazing. That's really
well, it took me 7 years, but I finally feel like I've done enough work to kind of
absolutely
pay it back. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotta
and
respect
we're just getting
that.
started.
That's amazing. Okay. So I know I do have to take another quick break, and then we've got a short period of time before the end. We were talking about a few kind of related stories. We can either go in that direction or we can talk about the future of this industry. So I'll ask you what you want to do. Take a moment to think about that. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a second. See, the challenge is we don't have unlimited time. We can't talk about everything. I'm curious to know how you feel about the future of this technology, not just Yara, but in general, artificial intelligence and the developments that we're looking at in the next 5 to 10 years. Or we can talk kind of about a couple of those stories that you had sent my way. Is there something that's really speaking to you right now that you want to dive into?
Well, I actually think that they're sort of they're very related, right?
They kind of converge together. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
whether it's Dario or
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that you mentioned leading up to the show is that you have a friend, Peter Hames. Personally, I'm not familiar with Peter Hames, but he was the co-founder, or is he still a co-founder, CEO of Big Health, now taking on a new role at Microsoft AI. So I'm assuming that he's no longer with Big Health, now taking on the role at Microsoft AI. And I'm curious to know, what excites you about this, what this means, how Peter might influence the work that's happening at Microsoft AI.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and it really does tie into sort of my view on the future of this industry, right? So there've been a number of significant appointments and some consolidation in the industry over the last couple of years. And one of the most interesting organizations has been Microsoft. They were very on the front foot with OpenAI's partnership. And then they were able to get the founders of Inflection AI to join them and Mustafa Suleyman to actually run Microsoft AI. And I'm almost certain that Mustafa was the person who approached Peter, because all three of us are British, and there's not that many people in the British tech AI and health scene. But yeah, Peter's just a tremendous thinker and a really, really brilliant mind. And he set out about 15, 16 years ago, I think it was, to start Big Health, which was then called Sleepio. And it was essentially that he had really bad insomnia, and he teamed up with a professor at Oxford to help build an insomnia program, which then became an insomnia and anxiety program, and is one of the few digital therapeutics that currently is reimbursable in the US. And so his commitment with Professor Espy and the team at Big Health was, let's build something that is as scalable as medicine, but that provides mental health support to people at scale. And so to see someone with that level of commitment to the mission that I think many of us in the industry share, kind of crowned as the vice president of health for Microsoft AI, is just a tremendously important and exciting moment. And so this was announced yesterday. It's not yet clear. I haven't managed to chat to Peter about, is this primarily for the UK market, EMEA, or is this a global role? But I think, and this sort of segues into Machines of Loving Grace, which I know you've discussed in the past.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at those 5 areas that Dario identified, the first one was physical, the second one was mental and the mind, and how AI helps those two. And then he goes on to talk about economic and peace and work. But, section 2 here, neuroscience and the mind, I think we've already done quite a lot to begin to really embrace computer vision in medicine and other concepts around diagnostics and around reduction of paperwork and things like that. But where I obviously am really excited is this notion of what can AI do to better understand the circuits in here and the challenges that those circuits and the ways that our brain can function. And so we have been really inspired by this. We've just brought on an amazing neuroscientist advisor out of Allen Institute who has a PhD in this area. And we're sort of trying to think about how we model cognitive health, not just through a psychological lens, but also a neuroscience lens. And I think that, as the healthcare industry begins to start to really embrace mental health, cognitive health, and the mind, that's going to be one of the most interesting frontiers, because there's just so much we don't yet understand about the mind. So all of these things, I think, all kind of point in the same direction, which is that there's an industry that's taking this seriously, and it's no longer just, a dream, but it's actually going to very quickly become a reality.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, how the AI understands the mind. What came up for me there is it's such a give and take, because it's about how AI understands the mind. It's also how we are understanding how the AI understands the mind. There's so much learning happening right now, and it's so much, from my perspective, because I'm not as steeped in the mechanics of AI, but there's so much unknown about how all of this does what it does. But I think if anything, the last couple of years has shown me that there's so much potential here. And when I look at at something as important as healthcare, and when I look at pattern recognition and spotting certain patterns in a specific scan that it's easy for a human to overlook, and I just see so much potential for the AI systems to develop over the coming years and become instrumental, if they haven't already in some cases, to keeping us healthy and making us healthier than we ever were. But that all remains to be seen. It's a new technology, so it's easy to assume that because it's new and it's different, or feels new anyways, that it can do all of these things that time will tell. But I feel pretty hopeful about it.
Me too. Yeah. Look, I think back at sort of closing the loop to the SwiftKey days, we early on in that journey, when deep learning was really in focus, we started with more basic natural language processing models, and when we started to sort of really unearth some of the neural stuff, we recognized that there are a lot of people out there saying fairly extraordinary things about AI's threat to humanity. One of them was Elon Musk, and one of them was Professor Stephen Hawking. And, and so we started to have these conversations, what felt like when it was really science fiction. And now we're sort of actually looking much, much more closely. The singularity is nearer. And so on that basis, I just think it's so important that we just take a really responsible, really good look. And I'm sure you watched some of the Dario interview on the Lex Friedman podcast. Like seeing just how brilliant the people that he is assembling at Anthropic to work on this problem are, gives me a lot of hope, right? It gives me a lot of faith that between him and Sam Altman and his crew and all of these other brilliant research entities that are springing up at universities and incubators all across the country and across the world, I think that we're going to do the right thing, and I think that many of us are going to push things in the right direction, as humans tend to over time, right? I'm an optimist.
So that way, yeah. I certainly hope so. Yeah.
The alternative's not worth thinking about.
No, exactly.
But if you do find yourself thinking about it at 2 a.m., I know a person or an entity. There you go.
That's right.
I know a thing.
Know a thing. It's called Yara AI, or meetyara.com. Of course, you're seeing this is like my beta feed because I have access. But if you don't have access, you'll see the main webpage, which I can't show right now unless I delete my cookies. I'm not going to do that right now. But anyways, go to meetyara.com. You can sign up for the beta, and hopefully that means that you'll be cleared and be able to use it pretty soon after. And yeah, congratulations, Joe. It's been really great getting the chance to catch up with you again and see what you're up to. And we'll have to have you back again sometime in the future, and do an update or kind of see the state of healthcare.
And I promise I'll fix this thing.
The microphone. We were troubleshooting that before the show. There was a faulty cord. Even AI can't fix a faulty cord. You just got to get a new cord, or I don't know if it's the mic or whatever. But it's all good. It's all good.
It's all good. Thank you so much for having me. And it's as I say, please meetyara.com. Go in there and be as honest or as dishonest as you'd like, and then just give us feedback, because we really are building this for the community, for anyone that thinks that they could use an ear to talk about anything. And Daniel in the comments asked, how private is it? It's completely private. It's encrypted at rest. It's encrypted in transit. It's GDPR compliant. So if you're in Europe, it's European servers. We just really don't want to do anything to get in the way of what should be a very private, very therapeutic experience. So let us know what you think, and please join us on this journey, because we think the world deserves more of this.
Right on. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for thank you for being vulnerable and sharing some stuff that I know is really near and dear to your heart on the show as well. I really appreciate that, and it really kind of speaks to the kind of the heart behind the product, and so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Great to have you, and we'll have you back. For everyone else, thank you so much for watching and listening. We do have the website. If you go to aiinside.show, you can find all of our past episodes, and also, ways to subscribe. You can link out to our Patreon at patreon.com/AIinsideShow. Me and Jeff Jarvis talking about artificial intelligence each and every week. Awesome guests like Joe Braidwood and others when we can get them. So, help us out. Go there and support us on Patreon. You get a lot of bonuses, but really, this is in 2025. The Patreon is going to become really pivotal to the health of this show. So your support means so much to Jeff and I, to keeping this ball rolling. So we really do appreciate it. You do get some other perks. If you contribute at the executive producer level, you get your name called out at the end of the show each and every week. This week is no different. Dr. Do, Jeffrey Maricini, WPVM 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina, Paul Lang, and Ryan Newell. Whew, it's a mouthful, but I'm happy to add more names there if y'all want to contribute. Thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you for watching and listening each and every week. And we'll see you next week on another episode of AI Inside. Bye, everybody. We'll see you then. Jeff will be back then, too, so he'll see you, too. All right, see you guys.